Okay, hello and welcome to the Ethereum Engineering Group meetup. Today, Dan and Madeline are going to talk about ConsenSys Quorum. So before we kick off the actual talk, Madeline and Dan, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'll jump in and go first. So I'm Dan Heyman. I've been with ConsenSys for a bit over 3 years now, and I'm the lead for the protocol engineering group at ConsenSys. Historically, we're the team that's built Hyperledger Besu, as well as Teku, which is an Ethereum 2.0 client. And with the recent partnership with JP Morgan, we'll be taking over responsibility for ConsenSys Quorum as well.
So I'm Madeline. I've been at ConsenSys just over 2 years. I started off primarily focusing on the privacy features and the documentation, and I'm the product lead for the protocol engineering group now.
All right, well, cool. Well, why don't you share your slides and let's get into the talk.
Right, just give me one sec. Center view, share screen. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so thanks so much for coming. As Peter said, we're going to be talking through ConsenSys Quorum today, a bit about the history, how we got here, why we made the acquisition, what the partnership means for the ecosystem, for current Quorum users, future Quorum users, and then I'll hand over to Madeline and we'll dive a bit into the roadmap. Sort of just some general housekeeping before we get started. Please make sure you're on mute. We want to make sure there aren't any audio problems. Ask questions throughout in the chat box, or feel free to interrupt us, whatever you want. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so if you have questions, then we can go for it. And as Peter said, we're going to be recording this and sharing it on YouTube. So if you don't want to be recorded, feel free to drop, I guess. Or don't say your questions out loud, just put them in the chat so your mug doesn't come up on the screen. We've already done intros, so I'll skip over this, but here are pretty pictures in perpetuity, should you want them. My email is on there, as is Madeline's. We're always happy to talk and dive deeper into the subject. Should you have questions, follow-ups, please feel free to reach out. We do want to engage with everyone building on the technology, interested in the technology, and so forth. Cool. So, what are we doing here today? What are we going to talk about? So to be a bit more precise, we're going to discuss how we got to this point and the history behind the partnership between JP Morgan and ConsenSys. This is a long time coming and comes out of a rich history of collaboration. We'll be discussing ConsenSys Quorum, what it is today, how it fits into the ConsenSys stack, and the products that are available around it. We'll give an overview of why we joined forces more formally, and then we'll dive into the roadmap. And as I already mentioned, we'll be taking questions at the end, so save up and give us your toughest ones. So quickly, before we get started, a brief look back at the collaboration. I find that the timeline and the history is really helpful to put this partnership in context and explain how we got here. So this is a super quick history of enterprise Ethereum, specifically as it relates to ConsenSys and JP Morgan. So the Ethereum white paper, as we all probably know, came out in 2013, and the network was launched in 2015. Very soon after, Joseph Lubin, co-founder of Ethereum, founded ConsenSys to help drive commercial adoption of the technology by growing the community, investing in the space, and building the core tools for enterprises to use the software. With that in mind, ConsenSys created protocol engineering groups and systems, also known as Pegasus, in 2017, which is when I joined the team. And over the last 3 years, we've grown to be roughly a 65-person team working on a few different areas of the core technology. Core to everything we do, obviously, is Ethereum mainnet today, Ethereum 1.0, and we launched an Ethereum 1.0 client originally called Pantheon in 2018, and then contributed to the Hyperledger Foundation in 2019 when it became Hyperledger Besu. In parallel to that, Quorum was created by JP Morgan in 2016 as a fork of Geth, another mainnet Ethereum client targeting enterprise use cases. This was, to JPM's credit, a major innovation in the space and served as an inspiration for a lot of the work Pegasus did. I remember some of the early conversations about the features that an enterprise Ethereum client needed to build, and Quorum set the gold standard, the original bar for what we were doing and how we understood the use cases, both within ConsenSys and in the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and broader efforts. But JPM didn't just stop there with the launch of Quorum. They've done a lot of innovation in the space. They launched the Interbank Information Network in 2017 and JPM Coin in 2019. The Interbank Information Network, also known as the IAN, has something like 400 banks already signed up to run a Quorum-based network in production, share secure information across the system. And it's a really powerful example of what we can do with the technology and why enterprise Ethereum is so powerful. Similarly, at ConsenSys, even while we've been building Hyperledger Besu, we've worked extensively on Quorum. We recently helped launch Covantis in production, which is based on Quorum as well. Covantis is an agricultural commodities network in Europe with a number of the major players in the space. And we're remarkably excited to be bringing both protocol work streams together under the ConsenSys Quorum brand and support IIN, JPM Coin, Covantis, and the dozens of production use cases already live on Quorum today. So that's sort of the history. To dive a little bit deeper into that, we've been working sort of aside from the public-facing stuff behind the scenes in a number of different areas. So we've collaborated on use case exploration, like, okay, we've got this tech, it's pretty powerful, we're pretty excited about it, but what do we actually do with it? And how do we enable other people to support it? So very quietly, ConsenSys over the last couple of years has been supporting Quorum networks in production, building on Quorum, working with JP Morgan to make sure the technology can fit different use cases. We've worked together at the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and the Hyperledger Foundation. So we're both organizations have board seats at the Hyperledger Foundation, are very sort of intimately engaged there. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Hyperledger Foundation, it's an enterprise blockchain subset of the Linux Foundation. And so it's where the Hyperledger Fabric sits, which is another enterprise Ethereum technology. It's where Sawtooth sits, which is another enterprise blockchain technology. And so we've been working in these forums behind the scenes for a long time. And more deliberately and more explicitly, we collaborated to form an enterprise Ethereum client specification, which was driven by a number of client implementers, but I'd say a lot of the work was done by the JP Morgan teams and ConsenSys teams. And through that, we worked on consensus mechanisms, permissioning, and privacy standards for enterprise Ethereum. And throughout this time, the teams got closer and closer and closer. So that's sort of a bit of the history of how we got to this point. And then we decided to take that relationship to the next level, if you will, and formally enter into a multifaceted partnership between ConsenSys and JP Morgan. That partnership includes an investment from JP Morgan in ConsenSys. It includes JP Morgan becoming a customer of ConsenSys Quorum and the software that we provide. And most relevant to this conversation, ConsenSys acquired Quorum as part of this partnership. So as we discussed, Quorum is a fork of Geth customized for private networks. It's used by a number of JPM initiatives and multiple third parties. And it was built sort of in parallel with Hyperledger Besu, which is the client that ConsenSys has been building for a long time, Apache 2 licensed, Java-based, supports public and private networks. And so with this acquisition, we're merging all our protocol efforts under the ConsenSys Quorum brand. And so this is, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation, one thing and one thing only, it's that ConsenSys Quorum now represents all the protocol level activities at ConsenSys for enterprise Ethereum. Inside ConsenSys Quorum, you have a Java-based option based on Hyperledger Besu or a Go-based option based on Go Quorum. They both work with the stacks that you're familiar with. And we're going to continue to drive the development of ConsenSys Quorum in both the underlying stacks. So what that means for us is advancing all the open source contributions. It means growing the enterprise Ethereum ecosystem and community. And it means supporting people who want to use this as developers or all the way into production. And so that's, I think, the high level overview. And what I'd like to do now is dive a little deeper into what is ConsenSys Quorum today, why we made this partnership and what motivated it. And then I'll hand over to Madeline to walk you through what's ahead. So before jumping into that though, it's really important to highlight and speak to existing Quorum users. So ConsenSys is 100% committed to open source code bases and to maintaining Quorum as a first-class open source code base for your production use cases. We'll be developing new features and ensuring that applications built on top of Quorum continue to be successful as part of ConsenSys Quorum. The Quorum dev team is going to be working closely over the next year with the ConsenSys protocol team on the roadmap and support. ConsenSys is going to have a dedicated team to support both clients. In fact, we already do. As I mentioned, the team is already over 60 people at the protocol, and we are hiring. So, let me pause here with a shameless plug. We are hiring for the Go Quorum team, and so Golang experts who are interested in the space, please feel free to email me. I have a hunch there might be one or two listening to this right now, and so I would be excited to chat and visit opportunities. But for sort of back to the regularly scheduled programming and away from hiring for a sec, I think there's a couple things that should really excite existing Quorum users as to why this will be better. So because we have a bigger team and are able to contribute more resources to the ConsenSys Quorum code base, we're going to be able to bring together the best elements of both implementations. We want to bring the features that we think are best in Go Quorum and apply them in Hyperledger Besu and vice versa. And this should meaningfully benefit users, right? We want to learn the lessons of all the production networks and make sure they're exposed for users as they go forward, and we don't make the same mistakes again. Significantly, we're committing to a merge roadmap that is very public. And so you'll see that roadmap at the end of this presentation, but it's not set in stone. We want to hear from existing users of Quorum and understand what you would like to be built. One thing we've heard from the market is that while JP Morgan has done a phenomenal job with ConsenSys Quorum, with Quorum in the past, and they deserve a ton of credit for the innovation in the space, one of the things that we're hoping ConsenSys can improve on is that they haven't been fantastic about publishing and committing to roadmaps and accepting user feedback on that roadmap, right? JP Morgan was building this for its own internal use cases primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, whereas ConsenSys is a customer-driven organization. So we are really excited to hear from you, work with you, and have your needs and requirements inform our roadmap. And so the final thing to existing Quorum users, another thing we've heard in the market is that some people want enterprise-grade support to take their use cases into production. And JP Morgan just wasn't equipped to do that. It's not their business. And so with the launch of ConsenSys Quorum, we also announced our enterprise-grade support offering, which we'll dive into a little bit more later. But I wanted to highlight that, in fact, JP Morgan itself is now a customer of our support offering via IIN and JPM Coin. And we hope existing Quorum users will feel excited about these opportunities as we are about this deal. So just to make sure there's no confusing on the branding and product packaging implications of this transition, ConsenSys Quorum now represents the Enterprise Ethereum bundle at ConsenSys. ConsenSys Quorum is live today, it is supported today, and it has two options inside it at the core client level. The first option is a Java-based option based on Hyperledger Besu, our Java Ethereum client for both mainnet and private networks. The second is based on Go Quorum, the most battle-tested production permission network with live applications. Right, so ConsenSys Quorum has two options. And to drill a little deeper and sort of take another look and once again repeat myself, because I think it'll take a little while for this message to fully sink in, what's actually inside ConsenSys Quorum. So we've discussed the Ethereum client level, right, where we have Hyperledger Besu and Go Quorum. But on top of that, we have private transaction managers. JP Morgan has pioneered the P2P privacy implementation common in enterprise Ethereum and added enhancements into Sarah. Orion is the default private transaction manager with Hyperledger Besu. It also enables privacy groups and some novel innovations that are helping push privacy and enterprise Ethereum forward. And one of the key items on the roadmap will be unifying the implementations to enable interop, but Madeline will discuss that a bit more later. And then there's also eSigner, which enables external key signing. This is all open source. A bit later in the presentation, we'll discuss some of the products ConsenSys offers on top of the open source software to accelerate and enable production use cases that are proprietary, but everything inside ConsenSys Quorum is open source. Now, of course, I've already mentioned the support we've rolled out, but just a little bit more detail on that. It's going to have different, it already does have different tiers, bronze, silver, and gold, ranging from sort of developer support to 24/7. We've already onboarded existing users to support, and we're happy to chat if you're interested. So why do we think we're better together? What are some of the advantages of this deal? So one key advantage is having both clients under one roof means we have a unified narrative around enterprise Ethereum and the benefits. We've heard a lot of market confusion in the past about the difference between Quorum and Hyperledger Besu, between Quorum and enterprise Ethereum. And some of the competitors of enterprise Ethereum, dare I say, have exploited that to confuse the market intentionally. And so by unifying the two main clients in the space, we're hoping to present a unified narrative around enterprise Ethereum and be very, very clear about the benefits. We're also going to have better collaboration with both groups of product developers working closely together, which means we'll be able to develop more features, roll out more choice, and ultimately offer better value to customers. We're going to have one support team supporting both clients, meaning that you can go into production and we'll be able to share the lessons and best practices that we've learned through battle testing the software. And we've got an increased number of strategic partnerships that are really important. I'm going to dive into a little bit more on the next slide. So, when I say on the previous slide that we're going to unify the narrative, it's not really just about the narrative. It's also about unifying the enterprise Ethereum community, because bluntly, our strength comes in no small part from the Ethereum community, the hundreds of thousands of developers who build on Ethereum. And by uniting under ConsenSys Quorum, we'll be able to offer and ensure that tools, applications, and software work interoperably across both clients. ConsenSys Quorum with Hyperledger Besu will also be mainnet compatible and supporting use cases that require mainnet, on top of the hundreds of large enterprises and large production use cases that are already using ConsenSys Quorum today across the industry and across use cases. I can't articulate this enough. For businesses who want to develop on blockchain, working with ConsenSys Quorum gives you access to a massive community, all the innovation the community has, and the optionality in the future. Being mainnet compatible brings a ton of innovation across Ethereum 2, zero-knowledge proofs, alternative privacy implementations, rollups, things like baseline, all to the fold, and enterprises get to benefit from these hundreds of thousands of developers who are experimenting on a daily basis. Plus, on the permission side, we've got this rich experience that you can learn from as well that's battle-tested, tried and true, and so forth. And so, my sales team would be mad at me if I didn't sort of do a little bragging and vanity slides. We have the biggest companies in the world using ConsenSys Quorum today. They exist across industry, from luxury retail to financial services. We have successful implementations of production use cases running today. They have a proven track record of implementation with dozens of projects. And we've developed patterns that make it quicker and easier to go to market. And so if you're interested or your enterprise is interested in blockchain technology at all today, we really do want to chat. We can talk you through the benefits, talk you through the services we offer to make sure you're successful, and talk you through, I think, the advantages of the core technology, which are pretty powerful. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Madeline, who's going to talk a little bit about how ConsenSys Quorum fits into the broader ConsenSys offerings and then the roadmap ahead.
Thanks, Dan. So these are our Quorum compatible products. So Dan's talked about our open source ConsenSys Quorum stack. And on top of that, we've got a series of enterprise grade proprietary products offered by ConsenSys. These products all exist, and we're happy to talk in further detail, demo, or hear more about specific requirements. So I don't have time to go through all of these in details, but just highlighting a couple of them. Codify Orchestrate. So that's come out of direct customer work to abstract away some of the complexity of taking blockchain use cases to production. So we found through our project work that it simplifies time to market by as much as 70%. It implements the components in a productized way that every blockchain use case is going to need in production. So there's things like nonce management, event handling, gas management. These are common components and virtually every use case will need these. Codify assets is another popular one. So it enables enterprises to leverage the token standards that are built into Ethereum for your digital asset needs. There's a lot of use cases out there today that rely on digital assets, and Codify assets will make this easy to implement out of the box. We've also got Codify Workflow, which provides standard business process capabilities on Ethereum. So you'll see a few more on there that I haven't mentioned. Hopefully the names will give some meaningful hints towards the functionality. We'll have future webinars that go through these in more details. The main takeaway is these proprietary modules exist to supercharge ConsenSys Quorum, and if you're interested in hearing about any of them in more details, just reach out to us. We're happy to talk. Next slide. So it's really exciting to be able to talk about the roadmap today and about how we're bringing the two clients together to build a stronger ConsenSys Quorum. Before we get into the detail, I know Dan mentioned this, there's quite a bit of detail on this roadmap, but we're definitely and absolutely committed to supporting both Hyperledger Besu, the Java-based version, and Go Quorum with the ongoing development and support of both the clients. We want to make sure that they work well for people as they launch and maintain production networks. And one of the key ways in which we'll be doing this is by focusing heavily on interoperability over the next 6 months. So at a high level, the sort of 3 main ways in which we're thinking about interoperability is at the protocol level. We've got consensus mechanism interop, that's the BFT point there, privacy and permissioning. And then at the plugin level, having components that can work on both of our Ethereum clients, and 3, the interledger work. So talking about those in a bit more detail. So BFT is Byzantine fault tolerant consensus mechanisms. Both Go Quorum and Hyperledger Besu have flavors of BFT consensus mechanisms currently. So this work is really about building on both of those and having the best BFT mechanism that we can have working across both clients. So privacy, you will have seen on some of the earlier slides that we've got 2 privacy transaction managers. They're both Java-based and Apache licensed. So what we're going to do is converge on Tessera and have Tessera working with both Hyperledger Besu and Go Quorum. And permissioning is about having common controls about who can connect to a network and who can transact on that network. So at the plugin level, both of the clients currently have frameworks to allow additional functionality to be built as plugins. This interoperability works about having a common framework that'll allow us to have a common set of plugins that work across both clients. So the interledger work is about being able to transact between different networks. I'm going to talk about this in more detail on different slides. So 2 major things are, when we talk about interledger, there's interledger as in quorum to quorum networks, and then there's interledger between Quorum and other enterprise Ethereum networks. On to the next slide. So you'll see some of the things from the previous slide repeated on here. This is breaking it down into a bit more detail and attaching a timeline to it. In addition to the interoperability work, which you'll see closest to the left in Q4 and Q1, as you move to the right, you'll see more work around enterprise integrations and optimizations. There's also a mainnet support work, which you'll see reflected with the Berlin and London network upgrades. So starting on the left with Q4, you'll see the big release and permissioning interop above it. So this doesn't look like a huge amount, but we're doing a lot of the groundwork for our future interop work, and making sure that we package and deploy ConsenSys Quorum so it works well. Then moving into Q1. So BFT appears both in Q1 and Q3. So the initial work is about making sure we've got an interoperable mechanism so we can run Quorum networks with both Hyperledger Besu and Go Quorum on them using a Byzantine fault-tolerant ConsenSys mechanism. Then there's also the thinking about how do we get to higher throughput and enhanced performance. So there's some thinking there about creating blocks on demand rather than the configured block time, which is how we work at the moment. So tooling, we're doing enhanced tooling to make sure our tooling works well with both sets of clients, ensuring that it's easy to deploy networks with both of the clients. So in Q2, you'll see a bullet point around integrated authorization and authentication. So currently in Besu, we use authorization and authentication to implement multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy is the concept that you can have multiple users on one node, but you can only, each user can only access the private state that they are authorized to. And this work is about adding the integrated authorization and authentication to the Go Quorum client. So common plugin framework, I mentioned that before. That's about ensuring that we can have a common set of plugins that will work across both clients. So I mentioned on the previous slide, I'd talk a bit more about the interledger work. So in Q3, you'll see the inter-quorum asset transfers, and then beyond Q3, you'll see the interledger integration. So it's really important to us that we're helping to build out the technology that makes the cross-network communication, message, and asset transfers work really well. We'll be iterating on the technology details and the best ways to get that implemented over the next 12 months or so. And it's a really exciting piece of work for us. So our mainnet team, as part of protocol engineering, we've got a core team that's focused on the mainnet and ensuring that Hyperledger Besu works well with mainnet and helps to drive the Ethereum ecosystem forward. So there's three major things to call out there. So the ongoing network upgrades, Berlin and London are the next ones. We're doing a significant piece of work around database performance. So database performance, improving database performance means that Besu will be able to sync faster and process more transactions. So performance is an area where we can really clearly see that research and implementation improvement on the mainnet provides benefits to private consortiums and enterprise use cases. Another area that our core protocol team's been heavily involved in and will continue to be is the EAP process and overall enhancements to the Ethereum protocol. So specifically EAP 1559 is looking to smooth out a lot of the spikes around transaction fees. And there's been a lot of great thinking about how this is going to work. And we've been involved in the implementation work around getting this happening. So I also wanted to highlight, with all of our enhancements and interop work, we're going to be working closely with existing users and networks and thinking through any required migrations and ensuring these work well for existing users. And more generally, we're really excited about the future of enterprise Ethereum, mainnet Ethereum, and getting our heads down and delivering on this roadmap. So I mentioned before, we've got a release coming up in November. November is very close to being next month now. So this will be our first bundled release that includes both the Java version and the Go-based versions and all the pieces to ensure ease of use and that you get all the relevant products. So ConsenSys Quorum is fully supported. We've got enterprise support, reach out if you've got any needs around that. And we'll be hosting a technical webinar in October that's talking about all the development details around ConsenSys Quorum. So if you sign up for our mailing list, you'll get the details to that. And that's it from me. I think we are Q&A.
Thank you, Madeline and Dan. There have been a few questions in the chat, and it's probably worthwhile, even though I think they've been answered in the chat, echoing them. And so one of the questions was probably answered in the slides anyway, but around quorum scope and the naming of quorum and how it relates to public blockchain. So, you know, where are we? What are your thoughts on that? I think, you know, you were saying Hyperledger Besu is the public chain, but anyway, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So Hyperledger Besu is fully mainnet compatible, and we do a lot of work to help support the mainnet community. As part of ConsenSys Quorum, we support Hyperledger Besu, and everything we build on top of Hyperledger Besu, particularly our private transaction manager or external key signer, are designed with mainnet in mind. So Hyperledger Besu is fully mainnet compatible, and therefore ConsenSys Quorum is also mainnet compatible. And that's really exciting because, as I said, it brings a wealth of innovation, experimentation, talent to play that other ecosystems can't really compete with.
Okay, and I think the next question has probably been answered in the chat twice about what are private transactions. So I'm not sure that they need to be answered, but I don't know, Madeline, do you want to talk to it, or are you happy with the answers that are in the chat?
So yeah, I guess the key thing with our private transaction functionality is to note that we use the off-chain private transaction managers. So the private transaction itself is distributed point to point, and what goes on the public chain is a pointer to the private transaction. So in some regulatory environments, it's really important that only the intended participants get the actual content of the private transaction, even if it's encrypted. So that's how the private transaction managers work. But yeah, happy to answer further if you've got further questions about it.
Got one. Madeline, why are we proud of this approach, and why do we think this privacy approach works really well?
So having the private transactions distributed point to point means that, so in terms of regulation, right, basically if you don't have the private transaction, you can't break the encryption, right? So that's why in some regulatory environments, it's really important that even encrypted, right, it's not shared onto the public chain. It also, we're doing some early performance testing around the approach, right? And some of the on-chain privacy approaches, you know, they have significant computation costs, whereas this, we can distribute directly point to point the private transaction, and then the pointer goes onto the public transaction, onto the public blockchain.
So the pointer is effectively a hash or something like that, so you can correlate it to the transaction, like the contents of it?
Yes, the pointer is basically a hash that points back to the transaction and the private transaction manager. So if you receive the hash and you don't have access to the private transaction, it's simply not there. Our privacy pre-compile will look, and then if you've got access to it, it will be retrieved. And if it's not in your private transaction manager, it will skip over as it's not there.
So we've added a lot of features to these to private transactions over the last couple of years, and we're continuing to do so. So we've done things like enabling one-time keys for private transactions, which adds a bit of anonymity to them that wasn't available before. We've introduced the concept of privacy groups. So instead of having to name every participant in a private transaction, you can just point it at a group. And that's super valuable because over time you can add and remove people from groups, which unlocks a whole bunch of use cases. And so when we compare this to other privacy approaches that some of the other enterprise blockchain systems use, we think it has a bunch of advantages. Madeline mentioned one, which is around the computational intensity of it. It's a really efficient privacy system. both in terms of state and memory, but also in terms of the actual processing of the transaction. There are some really interesting and novel zero-knowledge-based privacy approaches. We have one as well in-house that we're experimenting with. They're still rather computationally heavy, so we don't recommend them for private chain use cases just yet. But the private transaction manager we have has satisfied all the privacy requirements we've run into in production networks.
So you've sort of talked to it, but and I think I know the answer anyway, but how would you compare baseline to using private transactions? And before you answer the question, you might as well stop sharing so we can all see your lovely face much larger and easier and see everyone. But anyway, so baseline versus private transactions.
So baseline is super cool. I'm a huge fan of baseline. I think the answer really depends on your use case. So baseline enables mainnet to become basically a single source truth for that transactions or events happened. You can go verify that something happened. It's a rather powerful use case, but it's also fairly narrow as it's currently defined. When you create your own private chain, you have sort of full access to the chain and a much more robust ability to customize workflows, embed business processes, and unlock business value in a different degree. So the downside is you're running dedicated infrastructure for it. Baseline uses shared infrastructure on mainnet, but the advantage is you can be much more specific in the use cases you unlock. And so privacy fits into that because it's a key part of unlocking a lot of digital asset use cases where information is shared, any assets are transferred, or digital rights conferred in any way. I don't know if that did a good job answering the question. Let me know. If not, I can go a little bit deeper, but hopefully that covers it.
Yeah, no, that works. And I mean, and I think the only thing I'd add about baseline is it allows you to have a centralized ordering service where it's decentralized, but you've got one common source of truth, but on the order of events which happen off chain. Whereas with private transactions, I guess they're happening, well, they're not happening on mainnet, but they're happening in a chain, but separate. The next question that's in the Slack, I can see that Sly threw in, was around Ethereum 2. And how does ConsenSys Quorum and Ethereum 2 and Besu, how does all of that relate together? What's the...
Yeah, absolutely. So as you might know, ConsenSys is one of the lead implementers of Ethereum 2. So there are three main clients. Our protocol engineering team builds Teku, which is one of the clients on the testnets as we're driving the ecosystem forward. So it's a main area of effort for us. And we've built Teku from day one with enterprises in mind. So it's really an enterprise grade piece of software. ConsenSys Quorum today doesn't include Teku. Teku is sort of a standalone project, but as soon as we think Teku is really ready for enterprises and consortia chains, we'll be folding it in and making it interoperable with all the efforts on ConsenSys Quorum. And so what that really means in practice is we're going to have to create an upgrade path from ConsenSys Quorum based on Ethereum 1.0 to ConsenSys Quorum based on Ethereum 2.0. So we don't have complete line of sight on that upgrade path yet, but our intimate knowledge of Ethereum 1 and Ethereum 2 has given us a bunch of different ideas, and we're fairly confident that will be a smooth process. It'll include some sort of hard fork, presumably for existing networks, but it should be pretty smooth.
Sounds really good. The next one that's in the chat here is from Owen, and if I get this wrong, Owen, I hope you dive in to help clarify. Can you elaborate on the interchain functionality? And so there are some altcoins that are also offering some functionality such as Chainlink. And so what's the ConsenSys Quorum approach going to be, and how does it differ from those other approaches?
Madeline, you want to grab this one, or you want me to? I'll take a first pass. So I think one of the biggest differences between the other interledger efforts is this isn't trying to go mainnet to mainnet. It's not designed to handle the security thresholds per se of mainnet token transfers across different chains, which is how most of the interledger activities like Polkadot, sort of some of these other layer 2 solutions, what they're designed to enable. But this is really designed for private and consortium networks to unlock a few different use cases, specifically verifying state on a different chain. So it doesn't, it'll build towards a digital asset transfer across chains, but it doesn't even need to do that from day one. First bit is about verifying state. I can't really get into details at the moment of the design for interledger efforts, in part because I don't know them. But I think the other part is they actually haven't been finalized. So we've got a couple different approaches. We're weighing the trade-offs. And we've sort of designed POCs, and the JPM folks have designed POCs of some of them. And so we have line of sight on this. We know where it's going. But yeah, I don't have all the details today.
Sounds interesting. Yeah. Ooh, so Chris Hare's put one in. Any idea of the roadmap timeline for switching from Orion to Tessera? And following up with that, are all of the Orion features privacy groups intended to be ported into Tessera?
Yeah, so I answered that one in the chat. I can follow up here though. So that's covered off by the privacy interop bullet points. So Q1 2021. We'll be retaining privacy groups. The exact implementation details of where they are stored is still being worked through.
Cool. And Mark Staples has put a question in. For private transactions, what options are there to limit re-identification attacks, including discovery of an entity's transaction volume and existence of relationships with other businesses?
Yeah, so Dan mentioned one of the advantages of our privacy solution is we've implemented one-time keys. So basically, the market transaction that goes onto the public chain is signed with a random key. So then it's impossible to do volume analysis of how many transactions are coming from a particular address.
Mark followed up with a question about how is gas treated then? Presumably you can still track, you still need to pay gas.
Yeah, so on that will work in private permission networks, which are typically gas-free on the main net. So some people have implemented solutions where they have rotating keys, or at a higher level use a set of funded keys and rotate them. Yeah.
And I've
just one follow-up on that, which is if you're interested in using this privacy solution on mainnet, so most of the context we give here is for consortia chains, because that's the bulk of the usage today. But we have specific features and ideas and patterns for mainnet, and so we're happy to go into those further time. It's just the bulk of the usage is on consortia chains today.
Thank you. So Slice put in another one follow up from the ETH2 question. So Teku is Java-based. Will there be a Go-based offering for ETH2, e.g. based on Prism or other? So will there be a Go-based enterprise offering? Is that what you're saying, Sly?
Yeah, so if you upgrade from Eth1 to Eth2 and you pull along all your Besu people onto Teku, what happens to people using the Go-based?
Yeah, so Teku is currently the ETH2 client we plan to support. Right now, there's no plans to support any others. Part of that is just the way we've designed Teku from day one to have some of the enterprise-grade features and licensing that we expect. We might reevaluate that should other clients appear that we think are good contenders for it. But at the moment, Teku is the only client that has that vote of confidence for us. And the fact, it's a bit of inside baseball, inside politics, right? Because we built Teku, so we had the advantage of putting in the requirements we knew we would need from day one. And I think the other piece is ideally you only support one client at a time, right? Supporting multiple implementations adds complexity that if Teku is robust enough, hopefully we'll be able to avoid. I guess there are some people who would prefer a Golang based client just from a language choice. And so we need to make Teku sufficiently superior to the other implementations that the language handcuffs won't bother purists too much.
All right, are there any other questions? Okay, well, I'm sure if you have other questions that you think up later on, please just I'm going to post the video in later this afternoon, and then just put comments on the video. Actually, Dan, could you reshare the slides and let's just go through the last slide so we can talk about talks coming up just before we sign off. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. So in 2 weeks' time, we've got Vitalik is going to give a talk on account abstraction, and that will be at 12:30 Brisbane. That should be pretty awesome. A subject which is quite passionate about, so yep, should be good. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to learn about Raiden and their thoughts on layer 2 scaling. And so Dominic Schmidt is part of a team that have been working on Raiden, and I think are the lead team for Raiden. That'll be 5 p.m. Brisbane because they live in Germany. On November the 11th, we've got Alexei, who's going to talk about Turbo Geth. So he lives in London. So again, it's going to be in the afternoon Brisbane time. And then on November the 25th, which will be just before the American Thanksgiving, I'm hoping that we'll get some of the Filecoin team to give a talk on Filecoin. That one we haven't completely locked in because they're busy with their mainnet launch. But given they're currently talking about doing a mainnet launch in the week of October the 20-somethingth, then they should be fine by November the 25th. But anyway, we'll lock that in another few weeks. So I hope to see you all at all of those talks. And yeah. So anyway, thank you again, Dan and Madeline, for giving your talk. That was really awesome and really helpful. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully everyone else has as well. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us, Peter.
All right. See you all later. Bye-bye.